From waging war with Mexico and taking half their land, to buying Alaska and discovering gold, to bullying Denmark into giving you Greenland. This is every time US presidents conquered new territory. And some of these land grabs are so wild, you'll wonder how America went from a tiny strip of colonies to owning land on multiple continents and eyeing even more. But first, it all started with baby America. 'Cause after the Revolutionary War, the United States was basically just a thin slice of the East Coast. And at the time, the whole country stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River, and from the Great Lakes down to Spanish Florida. That's it. That was America. So how did it all change? Well, to the west sat a massive chunk of land called the Louisiana Territory, first owned by Spain, then by France. Down south, Spain controlled Florida. And up in the northwest, Britain and various native nations claimed the Oregon Country. In other words, America was boxed in. But here's where things get crazy. 'Cause American leaders looked at all that land and thought, yeah, we're gonna need that. And boy, did they go get it. 'Cause the first big land grab came from President Thomas Jefferson, who was apparently the greatest real estate negotiator in American history. Here's the setup. Jefferson really wanted New Orleans. Like, really wanted it. 'Cause whoever controlled New Orleans controlled access to the Mississippi River, a lifeline for American farmers shipping their goods. No river access meant say hello to an economic meltdown. So Jefferson sent two diplomats, Robert Livingston and James Monroe, to France with one mission: buy New Orleans and maybe a little land around it. And their budget? $10 million tops. But then something wild happened. Napoleon Bonaparte was struggling. Wars in Europe drained his treasury, and a slave rebellion in Haiti just obliterated his dreams of building a French empire in the Americas. So when the American diplomat showed up asking for New Orleans, Napoleon basically said, "You want New Orleans? How about I sell you all of it?" All of it? Napoleon offered the entire Louisiana Territory, over 828,000 square miles of land stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, from the Gulf of Mexico up to Canada. And the price was $15 million. That's about 4 cents an acre. 4 cents per acre! To put that in perspective, that's cheaper than a gumball. Jefferson basically doubled the size of the US for the cost of pizza per square mile. But here's the twist. Jefferson wasn't even sure the Constitution let him buy land. And he was a strict constitutionalist who believed in limited federal power. So buying half a continent, that wasn't exactly in the rulebook. But after salivating over all that glorious land, Jefferson kind of just shrugged and said, screw it. 'Cause when someone offers you the deal of the millennium, you don't say no. And the Louisiana Purchase changed everything. It gave America control of the Mississippi River, opened the door for westward expansion, and set the stage for Lewis and Clark to go figure out what we just bought. And what a haul it was! 'Cause that one deal would eventually turn into 15 states. Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, Minnesota, the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, even parts of Texas and New Mexico. All for 4 cents an acre. Jefferson didn't just buy land. He basically won the lottery. But while Jefferson wheeled and dealed for real estate, this next president just took what he wanted. 'Cause James Madison had his sights set on West Florida, a strip of land along the Gulf Coast, technically still controlled by Spain. But here's the thing. American settlers had already been moving in for years, and in 1810, they got a little impatient. 'Cause they declared independence from Spain, raised their own flag, and formed the Republic of West Florida, a country that lasted a grand total of 90 days. 'Cause Madison looked at this little rebellion and thought, actually, that land was probably ours anyway from the Louisiana Purchase. Let me just send in the troops. And in they marched. By 1813, the U.S. had absorbed about 20,000 square miles of West Florida, now parts of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And Spain was not happy about this. But they were kind of busy dealing with Napoleon invading their homeland, so they couldn't exactly put up a fight. Madison hit him with the finders keepers and walked away with some prime Gulf Coast real estate. Sir, I think a beach house here is going to be pretty valuable one day. But Madison only got part of Florida. The rest was still Spanish. So in comes James Monroe, the president who finally closed the deal on the whole peninsula. 'Cause at the time, Spain's empire was falling apart. Revolutions were popping off across Latin America, and in Florida, things were getting messy. General Andrew Jackson, not yet president but already causing chaos, marched into Spanish Florida during the Seminole Wars and basically did whatever he wanted. He captured Spanish forts and executed 2 British citizens he claimed were helping Native Americans. Yeah, it was a whole thing. Eventually, Spain looked around and realized we totally lost control of this place. So they cut their losses. In the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819, negotiated by Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, Spain officially ceded East and West Florida to the United States. What was the price? Well, the U.S. didn't pay Spain directly. Instead, they assumed $5 million in claims by American citizens against Spain. In other words, Spain lost Florida and got 0 cash. That's 72,000 square miles of swampland, beaches, and alligators, all American now. Sir, he's staring at me. Ah! But here's the best part. In 1823, Monroe laid down the Monroe Doctrine, basically telling Europe, stay out of the Western Hemisphere. This is our turf now. America was starting to flex, and Florida was just the beginning. But that's nothing compared to what James Polk pulled off. 'Cause this guy expanded U.S. territory more than any other president, and he did it all in just one term. You see, Polk was a true believer in manifest destiny, the idea that America was destined by God to stretch from sea to shining sea. And he didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk. Starting with Texas. 'Cause when Polk took office, Texas had been its own country since 1836, after American settlers revolted against Mexico and won independence. Remember the Alamo? Yeah, that was this whole saga. For nearly a decade, Texas existed as the Republic of Texas, a fully independent nation with its own president, currency, and everything. Howdy, partner. My president would like to have a word with your president. But here's the twist. Texas actually wanted to join the United States. The only problem was Mexico still claimed Texas as their territory and warned that annexation meant war. But Polk didn't care. He pushed it through anyway, and on December 29, 1845, Texas became the 28th state. That's 389,000 square miles of land stretching all the way down to the Rio Grande. Mexico was furious. But Polk, my man, was just getting started. Meanwhile, up north, another territorial showdown was brewing. The Oregon Country, a massive region covering modern-day Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and parts of Montana and Wyoming, had been jointly occupied by the United States and Britain since 1818. But now, American settlers were flooding in via the Oregon Trail, and tensions with Britain were heating up. And Polk's campaign slogan was 5440 or fight, which meant he wanted the U.S. border pushed all the way up to Alaska at the 5440 parallel. He was basically telling Britain, give us all of Oregon or we're throwing hands. But in the end, cooler heads prevailed. Britain didn't want another war with America, and Polk had bigger fish to fry down south. So in 1846, they signed a treaty setting the border at the 49th parallel, right where the U.S.-Canada border sits today. That's 286,000 square miles of Pacific Northwest territory secured without firing a shot. Woohoo! Oh, sorry, sir. Got a little carried away there. But here's where things get intense. 'Cause remember how Mexico warned that annexing Texas would mean war? Well, they weren't bluffing. Polk sent troops under General Zachary Taylor to the disputed border region between Texas and Mexico. And when Mexico forces attacked, Polk went to Congress and declared that Mexico had shed American blood on American soil. War had begun, and it was not a close fight. 'Cause American forces led by Taylor in the north and General Winfield Scott in the south absolutely dominated. By 1847, they captured Mexico City itself. So Mexico had no choice but to come to the table. And the result was the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, where Mexico ceded 530,000 square miles of land to the US. We're talking modern-day California, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming, all for $15 million. Oh, and here's the kicker. Just 1 year after this treaty was signed, gold was discovered in California. Sir, I got one! It's a gold rush! Hundreds of thousands of people flooded the new territory, and by 1850, California was officially a state. Polk's expansion literally struck gold. And by the time he left office, the United States stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. But wait, there was one little problem with all that shiny new Southwest territory. That terrain was mountainous, rocky, and difficult to travel. Not exactly ideal for building a railroad that connected the east and west coasts. And the best route still ran through land that was technically Mexican. So in came President Franklin Pierce, who sent Ambassador James Gadsden to negotiate a deal. And in 1853, the U.S. bought a strip of land along the southern border, about 30,000 square miles of what's now southern Arizona and New Mexico. The price for that was $10 million. And this finalized the southern edge of the contiguous United States. That bottom line we see on the map today was drawn by the Gadsden Purchase. Not flashy, but a nice little W from Pierce. But with the mainland mapped out, the United States set its sights a bit further and made what many called the most embarrassing purchase in American history. Well, at the time. 'Cause President Andrew Johnson bought a frozen wasteland called Alaska, and everyone laughed at him. See, back then, Russia owned Alaska. But after losing the Crimean War, Russia was broke and worried Britain might just swoop in and take Alaska anyway. So Russia offered to sell it to the US. And Secretary of State William Seward took the deal. He negotiated 586,000 square miles of Arctic wilderness for $7.2 million. That's about 2 cents an acre. And at the time, Americans thought it was a joke. They called it Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. Newspapers roasted the deal, 'cause why would anyone want a frozen wasteland full of polar bears? Haha, oh sir, how they doubted you. Fast forward a few decades, and the Klondike Gold Rush hits, where thousands of prospectors flood into Alaska chasing fortune. Fast forward again to 1968, and massive oil reserves are discovered at Prudhoe Bay. And fast forward to today, where Alaska is a strategic powerhouse, key for Arctic military operations, resource extraction, and even gives America a border with Russia. So, Seward's folly? More like Seward's genius. High five, sir. 'Cause Alaska is now the largest state in the Union, more than twice the size of Texas. And those natural resources, we're talking oil, natural gas, gold, zinc, and fish. Not bad for an icebox. But I need to get out this freaking weather before my beak freezes. And I think this next president agrees with me. 'Cause down in Hawaii, American businessmen have been operating for decades. They got rich, gained influence, and in 1893 staged a coup. With help from U.S. Marines, the plotters overthrew Queen Liliuokalani and established a republic. But here's the twist. President Grover Cleveland actually opposed annexation. He called the coup shameful and tried to reverse it. But McKinley, on the other hand, he saw opportunity. 'Cause when he became president, he pushed through the Newlands Resolution, officially annexing Hawaii as U.S. territory. That's 6,400 square miles of Pacific Islands. And most importantly, Pearl Harbor. which would go on to become the most important naval base in the Pacific, a perfect midway point between the US and Asia. And yep, Hawaii became a state in 1959. Aloha, fellas! Tasty! Flying by on a Hawaiian roller coaster ride. Oh, I almost forgot. Mrs. Flappy wanted me to mention that the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy remains deeply controversial to this day. In 1993, Congress officially apologized for America's role in the coup. Something William McKinley probably wasn't losing sleep over. 'Cause that same year, the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, Cuba. And to this day, nobody knows exactly what caused it. But American newspapers, especially William Randolph Hearst's yellow journalism empire, pointed the finger at Spain. Remember the Maine became a rallying cry. And just like that, America went to war. Charge! Thanks to guys like Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, the Spanish-American War was nice and easy. It lasted about 4 months, and Spain got absolutely wrecked. So they signed the Treaty of Paris and ceded Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines all to the United States. In Cuba, it gained independence from Spain, but under heavy U.S. influence thanks to the Platt Amendment, which gave America the right to intervene militarily whenever it wanted. So the price tag for all this was $20 million paid to Spain. Here you go, boys. Thanks for the discount. And just like that, America became an imperial power, with territory stretching from the Caribbean to the Western Pacific. But it wasn't all smooth sailing, because the Philippines didn't want to be an American colony. So the Philippine-American War broke out, and sheesh, this one had brutal atrocities on both sides. Eventually, the Philippines gained independence in 1946, but Puerto Rico and Guam remain U.S. territories today. So yeah, McKinley wasn't messing around. He was the first president to take America from a continental power to a global empire. Kinda like this next president. 'Cause Theodore Roosevelt literally helped create a country, just so he could build a canal through it. Talking about flexing your power, sir. Okay, here's the big picture. By now, America had territories in both the Atlantic and the Pacific. But getting ships between them meant sailing all the way around South America. Not exactly the most convenient route. So what was Teddy's solution? Build a canal, right through Central America. But there was just one small problem. Colombia controlled Panama, and Colombia wasn't playing ball on negotiations. So Roosevelt did what Roosevelt does and supported a group of Panamanian rebels who wanted independence from Colombia. And when they revolted, U.S. warships conveniently showed up to their aid. So Panama declared independence, and 15 days later, they signed a treaty giving the U.S. control of the canal zone in exchange for $10 million and annual payments. Here you go, boys. There's a lot more where that came from. The Panama Canal opened in 1914 and revolutionized global shipping and naval strategy overnight. Ships could now cross between oceans in hours instead of weeks. And Roosevelt called it his greatest accomplishment, and also reportedly said, "I took the canal zone," which, yeah, pretty much sums it up. But despite America building and controlling the Panama Canal for decades, Jimmy Carter handed the canal zone back to Panama under his presidency. His reason? The canal symbolized U.S. imperialism over Latin America, and he wanted to smooth things over by giving it back. But America's final territory came during World War I, because Woodrow Wilson was worried about German submarines creeping through the Caribbean. See, at the time, Denmark owned the Danish West Indies, a small group of islands including St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix, and had controlled them since the 1600s. But World War I changed everything, because German U-boats were prowling the Atlantic. The Panama Canal needed protection, and people feared that Germany might seize the islands as a naval base. So Wilson made Denmark an offer, $25 million in gold for 133 square miles of Caribbean territory. Denmark, who was neutral yet nervous, agreed to deal, and the islands became the U.S. Virgin Islands. Woohoo! I could get used to this life, sir. Another pina colada, please. But speaking of buying land from Denmark, President Donald Trump has had his eyes set on something bigger for years, and that's Greenland. Yep, Greenland, the world's largest island with 836,000 square miles of ice, rock, and strategic Arctic positioning. Sir, where are the pina coladas? It's freezing here. In 2019, Trump publicly floated the idea of buying Greenland from Denmark. His reasoning? National security, natural resources, and, in his words, a large real estate deal. But the Danes weren't too thrilled. They called it absurd, and Greenland's government said they were not for sale. Trump was so annoyed, he canceled a planned state visit to Denmark. Don't worry about it, sir. We can just go back to the Virgin Islands. Drinks are on me. But here's the thing. This whole Greenland thing isn't actually a new idea. Back in 1946, President Harry Truman offered Denmark $100 million for Greenland, and Denmark said no back then too. And strategically, it actually makes some sense. Climate change is melting Arctic ice, opening up new shipping routes and revealing vast mineral deposits. At the same time, Russia and China are both increasing their Arctic presence. And Greenland, it sits right in the middle of all that action. So, after winning the 2024 election, Trump revived the idea again, calling Greenland essential to national security. But this time, he wants to build the Golden Dome, basically a giant sci-fi missile shield to protect the entire US from everything. We're talking ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, cruise missiles, even stuff launched from space. As of now, Denmark and the US are still in talks over Greenland, and Trump is breaking out every negotiating tactic in the book to make it happen. Looks like we'll have to wait and see. But with all this new land, you might be wondering, what do US presidents actually do with their free time? So, this is every US president's favorite hobby. From driving an amphibious car into a lagoon, to secretly riding a mechanical horse in the White House bedroom, to boxing so hard as president, he literally went blind. Some of these activities are so unhinged, you'll be wondering how they kept it hidden from the public. So go ahead and click it. You know you want to.